the other morph tends to decrease, and vice versa, so that the number of morphs tends to stay relatively equal in a population. And then we have the concept of genetic drift, which is the way that a gene pool in a population can change, but it is due to something random. With natural selection, change in the genes in a population is not random at all. It's the result of which individual is best adapted to its environment. That one's more likely to survive and reproduce. But with genetic drift, there's a random change in allele frequency for a particular trait in one population. And so an example is that maybe a storm randomly kills the majority of squirrels in a particular population that are containing alleles for a light coat color. And so as a result of this storm, the coat color of the population would move towards something that was much darker because the lighter colored squirrels had been randomly killed in that storm. So genetic drift can cause a change in the allele frequency in a population, but it's completely due to something random rather than to an adaptation, which is how natural selection functions. So make sure you check your supplementary readings to understand convergence, extinction, balanced polymorphisms, and genetic drift.
Yeah, so I'm going through this back to front. Every one of those has to be check-boxed. And apparently I can take a test.
Cause a change in the allele then to an adaptation to understand convergence, extinction, balanced polymorphisms, and genetic drift.
Okay, maybe I can redo it from here. Let's go back. Where is that at? Here? Previous. There we go. Homology and analogy.
In this short unit, we're talking about homology and analogy, which are interesting concepts. And homology can give us an example or give us ideas about the evolutionary relatedness of organisms, whereas analogy sort of serves to confuse things a little bit if that's the only aspect you're looking at to try to determine whether organisms are related. So homology is similar structures that result from a common ancestry. They could have different functions, though. The forelimbs of tetrapods are examples of homologous structures. So for instance, if you look at the arm of a person and the arm of a bird and the foreleg of a cat and the front flipper of a whale or a dolphin, you might notice that the bones in here look a little bit different, but they actually are the same bones. They come from the same embryological origin, and that tells us that they have a common ancestor. However, if you look at the functions of these different structures, they're all very different. So the human hand is for grasping things. Obviously, a bird's wing is for flying. A cat's foreleg is for running and for catching prey. And the dolphin's flipper is for steering while they're swimming. So homologous structures are the result of common ancestry, but they can have different functions. Now, analogous structures look the same, but they come from a different ancestry. So they're similar structures that result from a common function, but a different ancestry. So wings in the different animals that have wings are very good examples of this. So for instance, here we have a bat, and the bat's wing surface is stretched over the bones of the foreleg. And then we look at this bee here, and there are no bones in the wing at all. And insects are not vertebrates like the bat is. And so the wings of a bat and a bee are analogous structures. They look similar because they're both for the purpose of flying, but they have a very different ancestry and they have a different embryological origin. So be sure to check your readings if you need more information about the difference between homology and analogy. In this unit, we're talking about major features of plant and animal evolution. So we start out with the endosymbiont theory, which explains the evolution of autotrophs from heterotrophs. In this short lecture, we don't have the time to go over each of these ideas in detail, so make sure you check your supplementary readings for more information about the endosymbiont theory and some of the other things in here. Early plants were aquatic and asexual based on fossil evidence and DNA evidence. The movement of plants to land was accompanied by many adaptations for water storage because they were no longer living in the water. A method of storing water was necessary for their survival, and methods for dealing with increased gravitational pull. And some examples of those are root systems that were for water storage or stem systems that stored water, and also land plants have much stronger cell walls than do aquatic plants.
Yeah.
Also during plant evolution, separate sexes allowed for greater genetic diversity, and so you'll see some of the more advanced or more recently evolved plants, such as these, often have flowers that are one sex or the other. First land plants did not have seeds. Evolution of seeds allowed colonization of more and different habitats because the seed protected the embryo from drying conditions in the air. Then the evolution of flowers allowed animals to be attracted for pollination and seed dispersal. So the major function of a flower is to attract pollinators so that they will disperse the pollen, and then when the fruits are developed, if they are large and bright and smell good, they're more likely to attract animals which might disperse the seeds to new places, which allows a species to colonize new areas. So moving into animal evolution, the first animals were aquatic, unicellular, and soft-bodied. Sponges here are examples of some of the earliest animals. Multicellularity and hard structures, such as spicules, which are kind of like the equivalent of a skeleton for a sponge, and exoskeletons eventually evolved after that. And then invertebrate animals, such as arthropods like scorpions and spiders and insects, were the first to leave the water and come onto the land. Fish were the first animals with backbones, and adaptations for conserving water and dealing with a higher gravitational pull appeared when these fish sort of evolved into an amphibian-type animal that then moved onto the land. And so, just like with plants, animals evolved adaptations for dealing with a drier environment and a higher gravitational pull when they moved from the water to the land. And finally, we get to this concept of explosion, and by that we mean a very fast increase in the diversity of living things. So in the Cambrian period, there was an explosion of multicellular organisms. This is when aquatic plants appeared, the first major animal phyla evolved, and we saw evidence of animals evolving to fill new niches. So for instance, active hunting, like this bizarre fish depicted here, or fish-like animal, burrowing into the sediment. There aren't a lot of pictures of that here in this image, but there were lots of organisms that started to dig tunnels and only had a few little bits of their body sticking up above the water. And making branching burrows was also something that was becoming more common during the Cambrian period. So check your reading for more information about the Cambrian and other explosions during geological time. In this unit, we're talking about adaptive radiation. So it's important to first understand what an adaptation is. This is an inherited characteristic, which means it's passed down from one generation to another, that provides a survival or reproductive advantage to the individual. So examples of adaptations include speed, camouflage, armor, and hearing. So I've got a picture here of the pronghorn, which is an animal unique to North America. It's also the second fastest land mammal on the planet and the fastest land mammal in North America. Pronghorns have evolved to be extremely fast, and initially it's believed, based on fossil evidence, that there were predators that could sometimes catch up to them, but over time and through the course of human interaction, all of the major predators of pronghorns have been eliminated. So now their speed isn't really much of a benefit to them as far as natural predators are concerned, and their biggest obstacle to survival is now habitat destruction. So an adaptation is something that provides an individual with a better chance at surviving and reproducing. A species is a population of interbreeding individuals. They have a common gene pool. They have viable offspring, meaning babies that can have babies. They don't interbreed with other populations. A new species forms when two populations no longer interbreed with each other. I've got these two pictures of cephalopods here because these are one of my favorite groups of animals. This here is a cuttlefish, and this is an octopus. And so even though these are both considered cephalopods, meaning head-foot animals, so the octopods and the cephalopods and the nautilus and squid, they look different from each other, and they will not interbreed with each other.
I'm sure I saw this already. Resource
partitioning is an interesting concept because it decreases competition between species by utilizing more and more.
They'll show up, and these show up. But these are not showing up. So, question is, why don't these show up? Bottom of the transcript. Got supplemental reading. Go back. Aha. Supplemental reading. Ah. I see. 62 pages. All the stuff I should be doing. And I will do it. I'll go back. Yeah, a lot of that vocabulary. I'm sure I'll need it. The slides. Lovely slides. Quite nice. Now,
things might have inherited blonde hair color. Among individuals in the driving force behind evolution. And so now we know that genes are where these characteristics come from. Variations in characteristics are the results of alleles. And remember, we talked about alleles when we discussed Mendelian genetics. So go back over the lectures and the readings from those sections if you need a refresher. And also, this short unit is about the history of evolutionary concepts. To start off with, evolution is genetic change in a population over time. Carolus Linnaeus, who we'll talk about in a future module, invented binomial nomenclature, which we still use today. He also was one of the first to write jump very high or very fast during its lifespan. In its lifetime, could stretch its neck. So stay tuned for future modules where we talk.
okay, I remember. And I'm sure I saw this. Okay. Now if I go back here, these should be checkboxed if I did it right. Some of them are. Adaptive radiation is not.
And that, therefore, limits the competition between each of these different species. Individuals, they have a common gene pool, are adaptive because they reduce competitors, which all evolve and get the nectar out of them. And that, therefore,
supplemental reading was probably missing. So I think it figures out that I didn't hit the bottom. And this one didn't show up either.
and also we know now that make sure you've been able to add to those concepts since then with the modern synthesis.
Great. Key terms. I'll definitely have to go over the key terms. Let's see how I did. Yep, does. I'm definitely going to have to check your understanding. Oh boy.
This unit is about evolutionary ecology, and that's the study of the evolution of interactions between and among species and with their environment. So examples of the kinds of things that evolutionary ecology studies are the origins of competition, mutualism, predators, prey, and pathogens. So one example is research on the origins of the mutualism between termites and their protozoan gut symbionts. There are two types of interactions that are studied with evolutionary ecology. One of them is with there's only one species that is being affected by interactions, both species are being affected. In this unit, we're talking about island biogeography, which is a really interesting concept, and islands have helped us to understand a lot about species diversity and speciation. But first, we need to talk about biogeography. This is, and their species is island biogeography, floating around on the water. The species because the more individuals there are on the island, it's that had as much time to develop new and different habitats. So check your supplementary readings for more details about the area, distance, and age effects on island biodiversity. In the history of evolutionary concepts, we'll talk about evolutionisms and genetic drift in detail. Humans will do the hominid fossils, these fossils.
Oh, I'm not ready for a test yet. No, not yet. Nope. Definitely not ready. Okay, so I completed a couple sections here. I'll have to check my understanding. Stopped right here, the concept of niche. Okay.